What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 334 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk some betting stuff.
We also happen to have one of the more unique situations that you'll get all year in kind of the NBA props betting space, which brought a buzz around the social media around, incentives for people that are selling picks and selling services and providing information, which is something that we obviously do. Also, the incentives of professional gamblers and getting this information and being able to capitalize it. And it's all based on news-related stuff, which, Mike Gallagher, you are, if not the best, among the very best. I always hesitate to say the best because I don't want to slight anybody out there.
You call me the best after yesterday.
In terms of breaking this stuff down and understanding it. And I think the nuance around the conversation is often lost in social media. And I think that's one of the voids that podcasts have been able to fill in the last 5 to 10 years, is providing more context and nuance around discussions that are important to be had. And so I thought we'd talk about that as well. So I'm really excited for this podcast. It's going to be a little bit different than what we've been putting out of late. We'll get back to the basketball analysis next week, but I thought it would be good to go through kind of the what happened last night with the Nets and Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas, and how, from an NBA prop betting perspective, it was an important situation to be able to identify and take advantage of, and then also talk about the state of NBA DFS games.
Yeah, so let's talk about Mikal. And it's funny because I saw the Nets injury report, and my first thought, like, you could literally see our props. We have a Slack, we communicate stuff where we're going to handle projections, all that stuff. And before the whole team got the whole injury report, I was like, oh my God, Mikal's going to be limited. And we were like on that so quick, and it was so good to be on that fast. And yeah, man, I don't even know what to say. Like, it was like instinct, and it's just like, it's funny because like just experience. We talked about this on the injury show yesterday. Like, honestly, experience is like so big, because the March 9th thing we talked about on the injury show. And just like going through experience for this whole thing is like so important, and you can't learn on the fly. Just like going through reps and like experiencing different things was why. And like we talked about all this stuff on the injury show, but it sucks to only get like one win on the record. Honestly, that's like my biggest regret, because like it was just such a smash. Like, I was so confident about it, and yeah, I'll hand you from there.
So let's walk through sort of what happened for those of you who are not in tune with the NBA prop betting markets, in tune with kind of what happened specifically in the NBA on December 27th. I know it's around the holidays, people are traveling. NBA games in the middle of the week are not always kind of top of mind. People might not be checking the box scores for Milwaukee and Brooklyn, but it was a unique situation in the NBA last night where not so unique that Brooklyn ruled a bunch of players out on the second night of back-to-back. That happens in the NBA from time to time. But they'd ruled out Nick Claxton, Cam Johnson, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Dorian Finney-Smith was listed questionable. He eventually got ruled out as well. The notable exception from their main players was Mikal Bridges. Now, Mikal Bridges has an Iron Man streak going in the NBA where he hasn't missed a game that he's been available for basically in his career. And it's very important to him. He's known as a guy who plays all the time. It's part of his identity, and it's something that we have seen them go out of their way to support in the past. And I think that's the key piece of information here. Mike noted a March 9th game from last year that Brooklyn did a similar thing. It was actually on the front end of a back-to-back last year. It was also against Milwaukee in a weird coincidence. And Mikal Bridges in that game played the entire first quarter and then did not return to the rest of the game. So when this news hits that they're resting everybody, our antennas go up, because we've seen this before. And that's what Mike's referring to in terms of the experience level of having seen this situation before, understanding that we're once again in the range of outcomes here where Mikal Bridges might just play the first quarter. We've also seen situations, the most notable in the NBA prop betting space, with Draymond Green a few years ago, where Draymond Green, on the return of Klay Thompson after this long injury, Draymond Green was reported to be out before the game by an opponent team beat writer. I believe it was the Cavs. I believe it was Serena.
Actually, the Warriors Twitter broke that first. Okay. And then Shams was like right behind.
Okay, I thought it was a Cavs beat reporter. I thought Serena Winters had it first, but maybe I'm wrong on that. And then eventually it was reported that no, Draymond's going to play. And so there was some confusion around what was happening. Well, what ends up happening in that game is Draymond starts the game. They tip the ball. He commits a foul, checks out, and is out for the game. And so the reporting was kind of right originally when they were like, oh, Draymond's going to be out, right? And then they amended the reporting to like, oh, he's starting, and we weren't really sure what happened. And it was an unusual situation that I don't think we'll ever see happen again, but Draymond essentially wanted to take the floor with Klay Thompson, his brother that he had played so many games with, to honor Klay Thompson's return. And what happened that night in the NBA props betting space is the people who figured this out, as there was some reporting right before tip that this might be the case, that he's only going to play limited minutes, started hitting alternative lines on Draymond Green, which some books offer as props. So instead of his normal props line being like 9.5 points, an alternative line might be under 3.5 points, and parlaying them all together to get really long odds. And so you'd create these parlays that you could like bet $100 to win $10,000 because you'd created such long odds on these situations. And so because of that, DraftKings took a big hit on this game. They were the book that was most exposed to this. It became a notable story within the industry that was covered, and DraftKings was debating whether to pay stuff out. They ended up ultimately paying stuff out, but it opened up the eyes to everybody kind of in the prop betting space that, hey, there are opportunities if you have news and information to potentially take advantage of markets that are not adjusted. And so when this happened last night with Mikal Bridges, those opportunities were once again available. It wasn't as clean as the Draymond Green situation because there was no reporting on exactly how long Mikal Bridges would play. If you go back and watch our injury show, which is on our YouTube page from 12/27, breaking it down, or if you check Mike Gallagher's Twitter feed, you will see a video clipped of us breaking it down. And in that segment, we talked about there were 3 potential situations for what we could see from Mikal Bridges. We could see him playing the whole first quarter. We could see him playing to a 20-minute mark, which is the new league referendum in terms of what counts for a game towards awards. You have to get to the 20-minute mark. And then we could see him play just normal but limited minutes. And instead of his 34, 35, we could see him play 28, 29 or whatever. All of those situations are good for normal unders if he's priced normally, which is what we put out to our subscribers as a bet. But the situations that are really good for the alt unders are just one of those 3 situations. So once again, you're only getting it's not fully clear information in terms of how you're dealing with this information. But once we had the idea and once we put out the bet, one of the subscribers in our Discord, first question that they asked back after we put out the bet is this because of Mikal Bridges' Iron Man streak, right? So our Discord, filled with very sharp bettors, is sort of aware of this as well. And Mike responded, maybe, ... From there, the reason we were being somewhat coy about this is because we knew we had other stuff that we were interested in looking at with Cam Thomas and different things like that. And we didn't want to blow up our spot for our service to get the maximum amount of subscribers as well. So then we go on our injury show and we talk through kind of all the different scenarios from there. At this point, Mikal Bridges' lines have now been pulled from books. There are other people, in the betting space touting this as well and what the Mikal Bridges action is going to be and whatnot. The books pull the Mikal Bridges lines. Cam Thomas lines are still there all day long. Most of the focus has been on Mikal Bridges, but we were able to identify both Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas as vulnerable to this situation because Cam Thomas, and we'll talk about this as well with Mike Gallagher and all the work that he does. Mike had remembered quotes from Jock Vaughn talking about Cam Thomas being worn down. And so we thought Cam Thomas could be treated similarly. Not 100%. We weren't 100% sure, but we were thinking about this all day long. And we had positioned our projections in a way that we weren't trying to give this away to everybody in the industry by having really low minutes projections, because many of our competitors will check what we're doing and maybe adjust their projections based off of what we're doing. And so we were trying not to give stuff away as well. All right, so this is the background of what happens. Now, Mike, what I'd like you to talk through is your history of consuming information related to Jock Vaughn in this specific day and what helped you have the confidence in taking this position that we ended up taking.
So I saw this coming from a mile away, honestly. Not to brag, but I'll never forget the Utah Jazz post game. And ever since I listened to that press conference, I was like, they're going to rest dudes. It's a matter of when. They have 2 back-to-backs coming up, Milwaukee and in Detroit, the last one, and then they had another one over the weekend or before the weekend as well. It's like they're gonna rest. Like they kept talking about how tired they was. Couple that with how Mikal Bridges had like a slump, and they kept talking about how worn down he was. It was like okay, and it's just like it's screaming at you. Like they're sitting out all their best players except their best player. It's just so obvious. So it's funny to see the people on Twitter like talking about, and the people who are complaining about it. It's just so obvious. And it's not even like I just feel bad that we couldn't like put more on it. That's like my biggest regret from the day. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much else to say. It was like so clear that they were going to do this.
Well, let's talk through a couple things here. First, it's very clear to you because you're a sicko who consumes every presser of every head coach of every single day in the NBA. That is a skill set that is very, very unique, and I doubt replicated by many other people in the world. And so, from your vantage point, it was clear as day, and we benefit from having that vantage point in our stuff and communicating that to subscribers where we can. In terms of the regret aspect of things, I think this is something that all bettors feel after these situations. We had it after the Draymond situation. We have it after this Mikal Bridges situation. And the thing that I want to remind everybody is there have been other situations in the past that I know you and I have acted on that we thought we had information on with related to a player maybe playing only a half and whatnot. And
Kevon Looney for one.
And well, I'm thinking of Kristaps Porzingis on a back-to-back. At one point that we thought we had information on.
Well, and honestly, I got some bad information. Not going to go into details, but like the Looney thing, I remember. Like, I know what you're talking about. Like I thought like really strongly about Looney, but he beat us, and I was like touting it on our Discord, and I was wrong on that one for sure. And he didn't like. He was still limited for sure, but like he wasn't like as limited as I thought. But go ahead.
But my point being is that hindsight is always 20/20 on these things. And for everybody that's feeling like they didn't take advantage of the situation strongly enough, if we outlined 3 different potential paths for Mikal Bridges last night. If it was path 2 or 3, and you had gone stronger on alternative single game parlay type lines and different things like that, and you got wrecked, you'd have the hindsight of saying, hey, like, I feel like I learned a lesson about risk tolerance there and how much I should be putting down on a given night. And so the thing that I want to highlight for everybody out there who has regrets around these situations, because we all have warped gambling brains after these situations, you have to think about what if it wasn't this lane that happened, because it wasn't 100% that this was going to happen in terms of how it could have played out. Obviously, the coaches knew that it was 100%, but we don't know. We're just guessing with this information best we can. And so I want to articulate first and foremost that whenever you see a situation like this that you think you might have a read on, the first thing that you should do, or the first thing you should be doing now, is thinking about exactly what's the maximum that I'd be comfortable losing in a situation that I could put down on this, and what ways do I want to try to get that capital down? Do I want to try to get it down all on one bet, one large single game parlay? Do I want to make a series of different single game parlays that are all kind of taking into account different categories and kind of in a way round robining them so I have different outs? I know there were a number of people that single game parlayed and got this right, and they lost because they had under 2.5 rebounds for Mikal Bridges, and he got 3 rebounds in the first quarter. And so that nukes a single game parlay right away. So I think what you want to do now, if you're preparing for these things in the future, is you want to set aside an idea of, this is how much I'm going to be able to allocate towards this unique scenario that I think is different, that I have an information edge. Maybe it's 2x my normal unit size, maybe it's 3x, maybe it's 5x, whatever you're comfortable with, like taking that risk spectrum and saying, like, I'm comfortable losing 10 units on this, 5 units on this, and I'm going to take a chance at multiplying it in this way. And then you want to identify in advance, so you're prepared for your next situation if this ever comes up again, and they might not, how you're going to attack it in terms of, am I going to go straight bets? Am I going to go, like, you could have made straight bets on every Mikal Bridges line. You could have parlayed Mikal Bridges lines together. You could have alt parlayed Mikal Bridges lines. You could have alt bet a straight Mikal Bridges. and what's your plan of attack for these things, and say like, okay, I want to put 15 to 20% of my unit risk that I'm putting on this on alt single game parlays. I want to put 15 to 20% on straight bets. I want to put 15 to 20%, so on and so forth. Whatever it is, you want that plan now. And you want to be making that plan now for how you're going to adjust, because if a situation looks like this in the future, then you want to be able to identify it. Part two to this is we're now all, because of the way our sick gambling brains are, we're all going to be looking for this exact situation to happen again with every possible rest situation that comes up. And it's unique. This happened once last year. It's happened once this year with the Nets. And I don't know if it'll happen again, because they're going to get a lot of flack for this. There's already a lot of, it's catching some mainstream media. The New York Post wrote about it. Mikal Bridges articulated his frustration with kind of their approach. It might not happen again. But when you think you have these edges, you want to be prepared on how to act. I also want to talk through how we handled this situation and how I handled the situation specifically. And then I want to transition that into sort of the response from like gambling Twitter, other quote unquote touts, and the commentary kind of around this, because I think that it's a worthy discussion as well. In terms of how we handle this, I want to note specifically, we do not bet anything that we put out to subscribers. It is at least in advance of. If we put out the bet and the bet comes back, we will bet it. We can bet it individually at a worse line. That's our motto with our subscribers, because we do not want to front run our subscribers in any way, shape, or form. We want to make sure they're getting the best lines. There are other services out there that do exactly the opposite, and they claim they do the opposite. So at least there's transparency there. But you know that that's what's happening. So with us, I waited for Mikal Bridges to come back. Mikal Bridges lines, if you miss the opportunity, and as I noted before, Mikal Bridges lines were pulled by the time we were off the injury show. They came back before tip. They came back at, the original lines were 23.5 points. They came back at 21.5 points. I bet Mikal Bridges stuff individually at that point. Everything individually that I could get down, I bet it at that point. Now, if he plays like 3 quarters, I probably am in jeopardy of losing that bet, but I'm taking the chance, right? So I bet all those things individually. The things that never left were Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas stuff never left the market. It was up the whole time.
It went up.
So, right, the lines went up further as the Mikal stuff came down. So what I did with Cam Thomas stuff, and again, my regrets would be, I didn't alt parlay Cam Thomas stuff, but I bet Cam Thomas after we released Cam Thomas stuff. We released Cam Thomas stuff closer to game time, because we then had the G Leaguers called up, and there was a quote from Jock Vaughn that he's going to play the G Leaguers. That's when we had full confidence, like we're on the right side of this. We're pushing in further. We sent out another bet on a Cam Thomas under at that point. Once that bet settled, that line came back up again. And then it was in live betting. Mikal Bridges never came back up in live betting, but Cam Thomas kept coming back up. And Cam Thomas was even available in the second quarter of that game. And I just kept hitting Cam Thomas unders in live betting and parlaying Cam Thomas stuff together. I ended up getting a few $1,000s down on this in total, which is great for me. I was very happy with like how I handled it in my allocation. I didn't make any sort of crazy money on this. It was all like 4-figure wins for me. It was not like, 5-figure, 6-figure wins for me, but I was very happy with how I handled this stuff individually and how we handled this stuff as a service. In terms of where, like the timeline of all this is, Mike sees the injury report. Mike alerts us to like, hey, we need to move on a Mikal Bridges bet because we're very confident on this. I agree. Our team signs off on it. We send out a Mikal Bridges bet. We talk through this stuff on the injury report show. Then later on, we're still holding the Cam Thomas bet with the idea of like, we might want to hit this but we're looking for more certain information. The more certain information that came was the G Leaguers being called up. And then the quote on top of it was the cherry on top. Jock Vaughn saying they're going to use the whole roster. And once we knew that, we were like, all systems go on this, we're good. Now, what we did not do with our subscribers, is we did not communicate to our subscribers specifically, go alt parlay all this stuff, because one, we're not in the business of recommending parlays. That's not what we've done. We're a props business. We set out individual plays at a time. And two, everybody's going to have different available options based on the book that they're playing. Like not all the alt lines are all the same on all the books, so it's like really hard to talk through. But we felt like we had set the stage with their injury show that we had put out and with the individual bets that we had put out, like, hey, this is a spot to potentially get down on. I think we maybe could have communicated it stronger. But I think that's kind of up in the air as to whether that actually benefits more people being able to get down versus, people being able to get down kind of individually and figuring it out. And I think talking through this will help better prepare people for the future on this stuff. But any other comments before we transition to the kind of the critiques and stuff on like how you personally handled it or how you think we could better handle it in the future, different things like that?
No, I think we handled it great. Like, it's funny 'cause our Discord's so sharp, man. Like the maybe ... They knew it. They knew it. Like we talked about it for so long. Our projections weren't like really telling the story, and they just knew. Like they were like, okay, Mike's clearly on this. I put the bet out, which I don't normally do. Sam's been pretty good at that. Clap. I think they just our Discord's just so sharp. So it's just funny, man. Like our Discord like wrecked the market because I follow all the injury news like a sicko. So just shout out to everyone on the Discord, and I'm happy that everyone made a little bit of change there. And I definitely so for me, I wish I hit it harder, man. I was so sure, and like you said, so from my perspective, we hit the news, and I didn't hit it obviously, and then it got hit, and I was like, dude, the line only moved like a point or two. Like we hit it at 24.5 points, and
24.5. It moved to 23.5 first, and then it took off, and then off the board, and then opened back up at 21.5.
Yep, and I kept hitting it. I hit it again and again, and so I did okay. I just wish I hit it harder. And then like the Cam Thomas stuff was really sharp, man. And shout out to Claff because he was. I was like, okay, we got that. It's really. I felt so strongly about Mikel. And I was like, okay, what if, and you mentioned it in our Slack, like, okay, oh my God, Cam had 4 shots in the first like 2 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, if he plays, this is dead.
Yeah.
But cause he doesn't have the Ironman streak. His minutes aren't as sharp. He didn't play 40 minutes like Mikel did. There wasn't enough information, but we had enough information where it was like, okay, they're going to play their G League guys. How do you play your G League guys if you're playing your main guys heavy minutes, right? The math just doesn't work. So that was kind of why we got on Cam, and I didn't hit that as hard as I should have, but in hindsight, that was like
less clear. But it's less.
I'm glad we got that out though.
But you're saying in hindsight, of course, but it was less clear at the time. The information was less clear that Cam Thomas was going to be limited than Mikal Bridges was. Now I want to get 100%. Into the commentary and the discourse kind of around this, because what happens inevitably when all these things happen is there are other people who also figured this stuff out on Twitter as well, and were tweeting about it and different things like that. And they're also trying to either grow their brand or perhaps sell a product or different things like that. And there's a lot of negativity in all of the gambling spaces, whether it's DFS, whether it's gambling, around people selling picks, information, different things like that, because there's a belief that nobody can really win at these things long term, and they're just kind of scamming people and different things like that. And it's an uphill battle that we have to market against as well with our stuff. And we try to be really thoughtful on the approach that we give to things. We try to be really open and transparent as to what we're doing, and we try to really discourage people from joining our props product unless you know exactly what you're getting into. We put all the disclaimers out that we can for this stuff. But I want to highlight that there are always everybody's responses to these situations are always self-interest, right? Mm-hmm. Our podcast talking about how we handled this situation, this is in our self-interest. It is not only providing transparency in terms of how we highlighted it, but it's serving as a marketing aspect to trying to continue to grow our product and make revenues off of our betting service, right? Off of our props package. That's self-interest. There's self-interest in people conveying this information out to Twitter or whoever to try to gain what other people would, negatively connotate as clout, but they might be trying to elevate their profile. They might be trying to sell a subscription. They might, whatever they're trying to do. And if you worked hard enough to identify this edge, you get to choose what you want to do with it. Once you identify the edge, that's your choice. Other people can have judgments on that choice. And a lot of professionals in gambling will say, oh, you decide to sell out for, a few subscriptions or for, clout, Twitter clout or whatever, when you could have turned this into six figures. I will tell you, most people are not able to figure out a way to turn this into six figures in a 4-hour span. They cannot wrangle up a gambling syndicate to put out a bunch of bets, get everybody accounting tracked, get the assets out of savings accounts and into betting accounts, and all attack this in a 4-hour span. People aren't set up that way. I know those of you out there in like professional gambling syndicates think like, oh, this is so easy. Like, of course, you're giving up hundreds of thousands of dollars to sell a few more, $40 subscriptions or whatever. Not everybody has that infrastructure built up and they can't take advantage of it. So it's ridiculous to assume that someone else is leaving that on the table. What they might be leaving on the table, right, is their ability to turn whatever they have in terms of liquid assets into these bets kind of immediately. But the idea that they can just go out and get like a loan from the bank in a 4-hour span, get it onto a betting account, and then put it all out there without like getting flagged on every account is insane. And it's stupid. And it's disingenuous. And the reason that they're putting that out there, or the idea that somebody is making this stupid mistake by not taking advantage of themselves, is because it's in their self-interest. They don't want people out there giving out information that could help others potentially nuke or eradicate an edge that is out there that they hope to find themselves. And if you are out there complaining about your inability to get this edge and execute on it because somebody else put it out there before you, the timing that people were putting this out, the lines had been up for hours. If you couldn't figure it out and execute it on your own, that's on you. Mm-hmm. And so like the people who are getting upset about not being able to exploit an edge that they would love to be able to exploit because someone else did, not for me. That's just hating. And like the game is the game. Everybody's got their own self-interest that they're trying to serve in this stuff. Some people are trying to elevate their profile, gain followers, whatever it is. That's the path that they've chosen that they believe is their best path to success. You might not agree with it. Cool. You don't need to throw judgment on other people for the way that they're going about trying to leverage the information that they have figured out to their own benefit. You see it clearly in a different way to go about doing it. It might not be so clear for someone else. And that's the one thing that I just want to highlight. Whenever anybody's talking about this stuff, they're talking about from a place of their own self-interest. And we get this stuff a lot with like our official record keeping, or like, when we give out bets. And look, we had to learn different stuff on this to fine tune our process over time. But we get a lot of questions about all this stuff about like, hey, it's disingenuous when you track this bet, or it's disingenuous when you give something that's not available on all the books at all the times and whatnot. And what we've said is, look, we're not out there actively like really, we're not buying Twitter ads and Instagram ads and everything and promoting our records and whatnot. We're just trying to say exactly what we do. And here's how we do it. And if you like it, great, stay with us. If it's not working for you, it didn't work for you. But ultimately, like a lot of the people who are lobbying complaints at other services or record keeping or different things, they just don't want those services to exist, except they're subscribing to those services and a lot of times offering those complaints. And that's where, to me, it's like everybody's self-interested. Everybody's doing kind of what's in their best interest. And I think that you should always take with a grain of salt the commentary around this stuff, because everybody's angling for their own good. And in our case, we're angling for our own good by talking about it this way, right? Because we're alerting you to like, this is how we go about our business. And if you'd like to join, check out the subscribe tab, so on and so forth. So we're not innocent from the perspective of, if there is an innocent for not acting in your own self-interest. But I just want to point out that like the judgment on others out there and how they behave, whether it's the gambling professionals, whether it's the services, whatever it is, like everybody's lobbing those critiques from a place of their own self-interest, not necessarily a sort of objective critiques.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I'll just say I don't know how people bet NBA and don't watch the injury show. Like, not to like, I hate bragging about myself. Like, I hate it. But like the amount of effort I put into like finding information is insane. Like, there's probably nobody on the whole planet that like grinds news as much as I do. I'm obsessed. And yeah, that was it. So I don't know how people don't want. I honestly don't know. And I was like looking at some Twitter stuff. people who are complaining, like, oh my God, how did this happen? Like, this is so obvious. It just like, you just got to follow the news and you got to follow like a sicko. And I tell you guys on the injury show on how it's going to go. So, but yeah, it's cool. Like you said, like, we're probably not going to get this again because like if the Nets sit people again, they're going to pull Mikal, like no
Yeah.
doubt. But one thing while you're talking, I wanted to kind of talk about other coaches who are like a little outside the box on how they think. I don't know. This is kind of like not what we talked about, but I just wanted to kind of talk through some coaches who just have some quirks. And like you were talking, and like I hope I'm not like giving stuff away, but like I would keep an eye on Utah. I would keep an eye on Houston, Utah for sure. Right? Like how crazy is Will Hardy with the guys he's been pulling in and out? So like that's something to watch. I could see Steve Clifford doing it. I could see Darko doing it. We saw him like finally pull the plug on his starting lineup. Like there's coaches who have quirks. Like not like Jacques Vaughn is like a unicorn for how bold he is with his rest stuff. And we've talked about this literally like the first day of the first post game of the season. Jacques Vaughn, divide these minutes up. That was like a hashtag for me in our Slack. And it was so obvious this dude like is gonna go outside the box for how he rested. And it was just so clear this was gonna happen. So from like it's just, like again, this is gonna be tough to hit it again, but I think it could happen again. And again, just watch the injury show. Like it's just that's it.
Yeah. I think it's unlikely we'll get another scenario like this again during the course of the season, but it's possible. It's something we speculated on with the new rules changes that you might see this year because players do care about, first team all NBA and awards and different things like that. And there's a games threshold minimum that you need to meet to be able to attain that. And you need to play 20 minutes in a game to qualify for each game that you play on that. So I think if we are going to see something like this again, it's probably late in the season with players who are around like the 63, 64 game mark. You could see some or trending for that direction. You might see stuff there, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be speculation. It's going to be like because a coach is not going to go out and say that we're going to play a guy, 20 minutes. They're not going to come out and say that. They might say like we're going to manage minutes. They like even in this case, they didn't say anything specific about managing Mikal's minutes. They talked around it. They said, and there was a lot of stuff. If you watch like Nets pregame, they were all talking about like Mikal. We'll see how many minutes he plays tonight. He played 40.
The schedule is so tough.
Yeah, and so I don't think you'll get 100% clarity on any of these situations, which is why I want to stress prepare now with what kind of unit size you would like to risk on this and how you would go about doing it so you can identify. And I think it's so easy to look back when you have the benefit of hindsight to say like, for sure, this is the way I should have done this.
Yeah. Not too much else to add. Just, what else was I going to say? Yeah. So the Nets like announced that like Mikal had this streak. They literally announced it with their starting lineup, which is insane. And I was like, oh, we won this bet. And it's funny because like Day'Ron Sharpe also got limited, and he got noted for playing in every game and making his first start. And there was like all these notes, and I was like, man, Day'Ron's limited, and oh boy. So I almost thought about loading up on Day'Ron, and he dropped a little because we dinged him a couple minutes in our projections. And after our Discord is so sharp. And so we dinged Day'Ron Sharpe, which was the right move. He was limited. And like if you would have bet his points over, you would have like if you hit it, like I think he ended at 12, but like there was like a real fine line there because he just went ham because he had no usage to compete with when he was out there. And then also I should so kind of rambling here, but so another like tell to me that was like, okay, we're getting this bet was Day'Ron picked up 2 quick fouls in like 5 minutes, and he didn't get a sub. And I was like, oh baby, we got this bet. And it's just like there's so like the amount of info that was confirmed on this was so insane to me. So yeah, shout out to us and shout out to everyone who made some money.
All right, let's transition the conversation to talking about the state of DFS. And this will go relatively fast. We spent a good amount of time on the betting stuff, but I think it's important to talk through as well. So what we've seen in the last few weeks from both FanDuel and DraftKings on different slates is they've shortened slates lower than the number of actual games in the NBA that night. They've taken away the late start games, the West Coast 10 o'clock games, to shorten a slate so that it starts at 7 o'clock and the last game tips off at 8 or 8:30, and to try to condense things. And why they're testing and experimenting things around this is because the tediousness of asking your customer to make sure that they're around checking lineups for late swap situations or news situations from a 5-hour window from, like, let's say 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, or 6 o'clock, 5:30 to 10:30, something like that, to like maybe a 2 or 3 hour window instead. And I think this is really interesting, and kudos to the sites for experimenting with stuff to see how it impacts people's interest. I've always had concerns about the sites chopping up the slates so much that it makes it harder to exploit edges, because you want bigger games to be able to exploit edges, especially in NBA. But I think they do need to do some testing around what keeps customers around and engaged. And so they are doing some of these things to try to test out, and we'll see what the responses are. We'll see where the direction goes ultimately. But at all times, if you're playing these games at a high level, you need to understand that the thing that is in the best interest of these games at all times, no matter what games you're playing, is attracting the most people to play them. What is the game that the people want to play the most? That's the game that you have to go out and figure out how to be best at. Because if you found like a really cool game that you're really great at and nobody wants to play it with you, it doesn't matter that you're really good at it. And so from a DFS NBA perspective, if you are playing at a high level and you want NBA DFS to continue to be a source of income for you, you should want the sites to be trying to test out things that keep people engaged in the best way possible. The bigger the game, the better for you. And I think that's something that you always should keep in perspective in these things. As a content provider, I keep it in perspective in terms of trying to figure out the future of NBA DFS and the products that we're offering and different things that we're trying to do to meet customer demand. It's something that you, if you're playing, should also kind of keep in perspective and understand, and let the sites do some experimenting to figure out kind of what they think is best. Ultimately, their incentives are aligned with you. They want the most people playing the games possible. That's how they make the most money. So give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of trying to test things out, is the first thing that I'd say. The second thing that I'd say on the slate stuff is, I really hope we can find some normal middle ground where it's not like the thing that people want the most is the smallest number of games, because that's where there's more edge, the more games that are played for stuff. So I hope we can find a middle ground, but ultimately the customer will dictate all this stuff. Remember, the customer is always right. And from a liquidity perspective, they're the ones providing it. So I wanted to hit on that kind of briefly. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on kind of game sizes and how that impacts, your work or playing DFS or anything like that.
I don't have much to add. Just, it's funny because even like TV is doing this. So we saw the NFL run ABC, ESPN, Monday Night Football like concurrently, which is very unusual to compete with their own brand, basically, right? And I know Levitan had tweeted about this. So like, it's even funny, like at the highest levels with all the revenue, like people are still exploring, which I love. I love people who are trying to figure out new stuff. And should mention the NBA on January 3rd, after my birthday, they are doing the same. They have a ABC game at 8:30, and then they're running an ESPN game at 10. So they'll be running concurrently for a couple hours. So that's very unusual to have same networks competing against each other. The NBA for years has not done this. NBA TV will play after ESPN, TNT, whatever it is. They won't run their main games over each other. So it's kind of funny. Like, this is all kind of coming about on different avenues for sports. And it's cool. That's all I'll really say. I love just trying new ideas. That's all I'll really had. Everything else you said was really cool.
Yeah, and so one of the reasons that they're trying these things is because I think they want to keep late swap as an option, because they have tried. Remember, these sites have tried to eliminate late swap. There was an NBA year where there was no late swap, and on FanDuel they had a drop score situation, which was
that was cool.
Totally
I thought that was cool.
totally different innovative way. They ended up choosing to scrap that and kind of go in a different direction. But this is all because they know if they get rid of late swap or something where a customer takes a zero and they're unable to change it, that's the worst experience. And look, that even happens in NBA sometimes now because of the injury reporting. And this is why we harp on the injury reporting as so important, because we're self-interested. We want the games to be something that people want to play because that's how we make a living. And so if the games become really frustrating for people to play because you're taking zeros, people are going to be disinterested in the product. They're not going to want to play the game because they feel like they're going to kind of getting cheated out of having a chance to make money or have the entertainment value when you take a zero. So this is all to keep late swap available while lessening the burden on the individual. And I understand kind of where they're coming from with this stuff. I also wanted to couple this with what we have seen in the DraftKings space this year, which is really tight pricing. In the past on DraftKings, you would see, and this has happened in the NFL as well, you would see the salary floor on players go all the way down to 3,000. And there would be times where each and every night you'd have a player sub 4,500 that you'd feel like was a pretty good value, and it would allow you to build with a bunch of studs and everything. And I think it's really interesting, this dynamic, because generally the tighter the pricing has two antagonistic effects in terms of the general customer. So if you think of a casual DFS player and what they'd like to be able to do, they'd like to be able to build a lineup that has the stars, right? They want to root for like Luka Doncic. They want to root for LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And they want to, so you would think like looser pricing allows them to build lineups that they're more excited about and kind of keeps the casual customer building around. But the looser the pricing, it's all on a pendulum. But if everybody was free, the edge would be very small if there was no distinction on pricing. If everybody was priced perfectly, theoretically perfectly, like everybody is priced to the exact dollar per point, there's no edge, right? So if you think of it on a pendulum, both sides exist with no edge. The middle, where the edge is where it's like, you know, somewhat loose, somewhat tight, right? But we've drifted into like really tight area this year. And really tight area has less edge naturally if people are playing with projections and different things like that. But it has more edge versus the casual player who doesn't want to play in the tight pricing and wants to force in the stars. So it's been interesting to me to see DraftKings sort of choose this pricing tactic that naturally makes it so that amongst the skilled players, I think there's actually like less differentiation in edge because the pricing is so tight that you're getting sort of similarly projected lineups kind of no matter who you play, and you're getting forced into playing certain options. And then it becomes more of a game theory game of like, can you pick the right nights to fade the really heavy chalk and find different options, or do you just play into it? And then if you went looser on the pricing, you would have it so that there's potentially more edge available for the professionals, but it feels like the casual player can build lineups that they're really liking. And so I'm interested to see where that pricing dynamic changes on the pendulum during the course of the year. But I think it's important to really understand that the tighter the pricing is, the harder it is to beat your other highly skilled opponents, but the easier it is to beat the casual opponents, because the casual opponents are going to force in the studs that they want to play on a given night, as opposed to creating these like balanced lineups of a bunch of like tertiary guys. Like, who wants to play like Kelly Oubre and DeAnthony Melton and Bojan Bogdanovic when you can play like Anthony Davis and Pascal Siakam and, oh, there's this 3K guy that scored 20 points last game, let me put him in, right? And so I think that's what's happening in DFS right now, which you're seeing. There's from my vantage point, I'm not able to play NBA DFS as much these days because of the content responsibilities and the projection responsibilities. But from what I see, I'm seeing a little bit more of a mixed year at the top from the top players that I've seen historically. And I'm seeing fewer totally random names come up, which makes sense with like a tighter pricing experience, which means it's a little bit more random amongst the good players and a little bit less likely for a casual, like single entry player that pops in once a week to find their way to the top. But I wanted to talk through that structure a little bit because I think it's interesting to follow. And I think the future of NBA DFS is something to examine as well in terms of what are the things that for the game to really grow that people need to get to eliminate. We need to eliminate ambiguity on injury reporting and late scratches.
Good luck with that.
Exactly. So what do? You tighten up the game window. So I think this probably is the future of NBA DFS. And then you need to attract casual people. I think the pricing will need to loosen up to attract and hold casual people. But I think it needs to be, if you're looking at the spectrum of edge, I think it needs to be on the lower edge side of the looser pricing spectrum, which means like really loose pricing, where you can almost not make a bad team because you want to keep the difference between NBA and NFL DFS for like a casual person. NFL DFS is once a week. So they lose money maybe once a week. Every once in a while they win. And over a 20-week sample of NFL, they don't know if they're good or not. So they come back next year, right? So it takes years to like burn that account that knows that they're not good. In NBA DFS, that happens in weeks because every day is a slate. So I think they need to make it so it's a lower edge game. And if they're going to make it a lower edge game and a more casual game, the last part of that equation that needs to happen to keep the ecosystem going is the rake needs to come down. And I don't know if that will ever happen with these DFS sites. The hope is that, with FanDuel and DraftKings specifically, that they make enough on the betting side of things, or if they expand into iCasino or whatever it is, they make enough to make the DFS side a lower margin product that's more of a consumer branding kind of experience benefit to them, where they get their loyal customers who churn a bunch of rake during the course of the season, but it's at lower margins. That's ultimately where I think DFS needs to get, but I think it's going to take a lot of time for things to get there. So I wanted to get kind of my thoughts out on the state of DFS because I've seen a lot of chatter on it on social around the industry, and I felt it was hard to kind of chime in on the discussion on Twitter or X these days. I think it's just challenging to do. So I figured we would tackle it in this podcast.
Yeah, that was great. I don't tweet anymore. It's just not even fun anymore. But yeah, I think one thing that kind of encapsulates how tight it is was Andre Drummond, right? 95% in the milli.
Yeah.
Like everyone knew you had to play Drummond. You had to play him. And that like wouldn't happen before because there were other options. And now it's like, because I mean, just doing this content a couple of years ago, it was like, okay, hey, this guy, we used to literally do like a spend down. Hey, we used to rank spend down guys, and now you can't. There's like 2 or 3 a night. So that's kind of where it's at. But you laid that out really well. I don't have anything to add as usual.
All right. Well, then let's wrap it because we talked a lot on the betting space. We talked a lot on the NBA DFS space. Of course, the reason we talked about those things is our own self-interest. So head on over to establishedrun.com/subscribe-NBA. If you're interested in joining any of our premium packages, we are still running a holiday sale. So get in before the end of the new year, 25% off any of the Established Run NBA products. That's props, that's DFS, whether it's weekly, monthly, seasonal. You can get a 25% off discount with our holiday sale now currently. So head on over to establishedrun.com/subscribe-NBA for more details on all of our packages.
Do it now while supplies last. No, they last. So I appreciate everyone. You guys take care. Catch you guys next time.